I never liked being alone on cruise ships. Maybe it was the isolation, or the way the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Maybe it was how, no matter how big the ship was, you were still trapped. But when my fiancé Kyle and I booked our honeymoon cruise, I tried to push those thoughts aside. It was supposed to be perfect, 7 nights of luxury, beautiful ocean views, and unlimited drinks. The ship was massive, practically a floating city, and our balcony suite had the kind of view you only see in commercials. It was everything we had imagined. Until the 4th night. That was when I first saw the woman in white. We had just finished dinner, and were walking back to our cabin when Kyle realized he had left his phone in the restaurant. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll meet you in a few minutes." I nodded and kept walking, enjoying the soft hum of the ship at night. The hallways were quiet, most passengers already back in their rooms. Then, just as I turned the corner to our hall, I saw her, a woman in a white dress, standing at the far end of the corridor. Her back was to me, her dark hair falling past her shoulders. She wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still, facing the wall. Something about her posture made my skin prickle. "Ma'am," I called, hesitant. She didn't react. I took a step forward, glancing at the doors nearby. Maybe she was locked out of her room? Maybe she was drunk? Then she twitched. Not turned, not shifted, just twitched, like something had jerked her head slightly to the side. I took a step back. Then she moved, not toward me, but into the wall, like she wasn't walking, but gliding. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes must have been playing tricks on me. But then, she disappeared around the corner. A shiver ran down my spine. I hurried to our cabin, locking the door behind me. Kyle came back a few minutes later. "Hey, you okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." I didn't tell him. Not that night. But I should have. Because the next time I saw her, she was inside our cabin. It was 2:48 a.m. when I woke up. The room was too cold, the air thick with something I couldn't name. Then I noticed the balcony door was open. Just an inch. The curtains swayed gently, the salty breeze making my skin prickle. I turned toward Kyle, but he was fast asleep, his breathing steady. Then, from the corner of my eye, a shape, standing by the balcony door. I froze. It was her, the woman in white. Her face was turned toward the ocean, her hands resting at her sides. But her fingers were twitching, moving rapidly, like they were grasping at something invisible. A choked sound caught in my throat. I tried to move, tried to wake Kyle, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch. Then, she turned. Not her body, just her head. Too fast, too unnatural. Her eyes weren't right. They were black, endless. And then, she smiled. Not in a friendly way, not in a human way. In a way that made my stomach twist and my breath lock in my throat. Then, she stepped backward, out of the balcony, into the open air. My paralysis broke. I lunged forward, gasping. The balcony was empty. No sign of her. Just the vast, endless ocean stretching into darkness. I slammed the door shut, locking it. Then I shook Kyle awake. He groaned. "What? What happened?" I pointed at the balcony, my hands shaking. "There was a woman," I gasped. "She was standing right there. Then she just... Kyle sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Babe, slow down. What are you talking about?" I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. But the balcony was normal. The curtains had stopped moving. The door was locked. There was no evidence of anyone ever being there. Kyle sighed, pulling me into his arms. "You had a nightmare." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that I knew what I saw, but I didn't. Because deep down, I didn't want to know the real answer. The next morning, I went to the front desk. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an explanation. Maybe reassurance. Instead, the woman behind the desk went pale. She exchanged a look with another crew member. Then she asked, "What room are you in?" My stomach dropped. "Cabin 912, I said. "Why?" She hesitated. Then, in a low voice, "There was a woman in that room last year." I stared. "What do you mean?" The crew member shifted uncomfortably. "She fell overboard." A chill crawled up my spine. "No one knows how," the woman added. She was seen walking toward the balcony, but the cameras glitched. By the time security checked, she was gone. I felt nauseous. She was wearing white, wasn't she? I whispered. The woman's face drained of color. I left the desk without another word. That night, I made Cal switch cabins, but it didn't help, because at 2:48 a.m., I woke up again. Not from a nightmare, not from a sound, but from a feeling. Something was watching me. I turned my head, and there, standing in the reflection of the TV screen, was the woman in white, smiling, waiting. I never expected a work trip to turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. I work in finance, and my boss, Jeff, had been talking for months about rewarding our team with a company retreat. I thought it would be some resort or a dull corporate conference, but instead, he surprised us with a 5-day luxury cruise. It sounded incredible. A free trip, open bars, endless food, and nothing but ocean views. I wasn't going to say no. Jeff brought along his wife, Megan, and his 15-year-old son, Ben. Ben was quiet, always glued to his phone, barely looking up when people talked to him. He reminded me of my younger brother, permanently attached to technology, disinterested in adult conversation. The first 2 days of the cruise were perfect. Clear skies, warm sun, and non-stop entertainment. I spent my time by the pool, drinking overpriced cocktails and enjoying the fact that, for once, work wasn't stressing me out. Then, on the third night, everything changed. I went to bed around midnight, exhausted from a day of swimming and overeating. My cabin was 2 doors down from Jeff and his family. The ship was still alive with people drinking at the late-night bar and casino, but my exhaustion made it easy to ignore the noise. At 1:45 a.m., a loud banging on my door jolted me awake. I sat up, disoriented. More pounding. Frantic. I stumbled out of bed and yanked the door open. It was Megan. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "Is Ben with you?" she gasped. I blinked, still groggy. "What? No. Why would he be?" Megan's eyes filled with panic. "He never came back to our cabin after dinner. We thought maybe he crashed in someone else's room." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Ben was missing. Jeff was already at the ship's customer service desk when we got there. His face was tight, his hands clenched into fists. Security was taking it seriously. A missing teenager on a cruise ship wasn't something they ignored. Within minutes, an announcement echoed over the intercom, and the search began. The ship was massive, practically a floating city. Finding one person on it? Not easy. The crew checked everywhere. The pools, the lounges, the game rooms. Nothing. By 3 a.m., the mood had shifted from concern to terrified. That's when security suggested we start checking the restricted areas, the staff-only sections, the closed-off halls below deck, the mechanical rooms. We split into groups. I was paired with a security officer, a no-nonsense guy named Reed. He led me through the lower levels of the ship, where guests weren't supposed to go. Everything felt wrong down there. The lights flickered, and the walls were narrower, the hallways colder. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the ship itself was holding its breath. Then we found the door. It was an old, metal door, slightly ajar, leading into an unlit storage area. Reed pushed it open, and there, sitting on the floor, was Ben. His hands were tied behind his back, his mouth gagged with a torn strip of fabric. His eyes were wide with terror. My stomach dropped. Reed and I rushed to untie him. The second the gag was out, Ben started shaking. He said if I talked, he'd kill my family, Ben stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. My blood ran cold. "Who?" I asked. Ben's breath hitched. He looked around wildly, like the man might still be standing right behind us. Then, barely audible, a man dressed in black. "He grabbed me after dinner. He dragged me down here." Reed's face hardened. He pulled out his radio. "We have him," he said. "Suspect is still on board." Ben let out a sob. "He's still here." He watched me. He kept whispering. Ben's voice caught. I swallowed hard. "Whispering what?" Ben shook his head violently, squeezing his eyes shut. Reed and I exchanged a look. We needed to get out of there. We carried Ben back upstairs. When we burst into the main deck, Jeff and Megan were already there. their faces etched with panic. The relief in their eyes when they saw Ben was overwhelming. But the nightmare wasn't over. Security locked down the restricted areas and started combing through the camera footage. Then, at sunrise, they found something. A man, dressed in all black, lurking in the lower decks, his face blurred by the grainy camera quality. And there, clear as day, was him dragging Ben into the storage room. The security team ran a full search of the ship. Every guest was accounted for. Every staff member was identified. Except one. The man in black? He wasn't on any of the ship's manifests. There was no record of him boarding. No passenger logs. No employee files. Nothing. The captain called for a full ship sweep. Every hall, every room. They never found him. It was like he had never been there at all. We docked the next morning, and Ben's family left the ship immediately. The authorities got involved, but what could they do? All they had was grainy footage of a man who didn't exist. Months later, I still can't get Ben's words out of my head. He watched me. He kept whispering, and I keep wondering, where did he go? And worse, who will he take next? I never liked the idea of cruise ships. Something about being trapped in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by strangers, always unsettled me. But when my best friend Emma invited me on a week-long cruise for her birthday, I didn't want to be the only one who said no. She had booked the trip months in advance, gushing about the luxury liner, the endless buffets, and the private balcony cabins. "This is going to be the best week of our lives," she had promised. It wasn't. The first few days were fine. We spent most of our time drinking cocktails on the top deck, eating way too much food, and exploring the ship's endless entertainment options. Then, on the third night, things started to feel wrong. It was Emma who noticed it first. We had just finished dinner and were heading back to our cabin when she suddenly stopped mid-step in the hallway. I turned, confused. "What's up?" She frowned, looking over her shoulder. "I swear, I just saw someone standing outside our room." I glanced down the hall. The corridor was empty, the patterned carpet stretching out toward the elevator. "There's no one there," I said. Emma hesitated, her brows knitting together. "They were just standing there," she muttered, "right by our door. And then She trailed off. A crew member walked past us, and Emma shook her head. "Never mind. Let's go." I brushed it off as a trick of the lights, maybe just a fellow passenger walking past at the wrong time. But that night, I woke up to something strange. A sound. Not loud. Just wrong. A faint, wet tapping. Like fingers pressing against glass. I sat up, my pulse quickening. The room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight streamed through the balcony door, casting a faint glow across the bed. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. I turned toward the balcony, and I froze. A shadow was standing just beyond the glass. Tall, motionless, watching. I couldn't move. For a split second, I told myself it had to be a reflection. Maybe the angle of the moonlight, maybe my tired brain playing tricks on me. Then, it moved. A slow tilt of the head, just enough to let me know it was real. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. And then, the balcony door handle turned. I lunged forward, grabbing Emma's arm and shaking her awake. "Emma, wake up," I hissed. She groaned, rubbing her eyes. "What?" I pointed at the balcony. The shadow was gone. Emma squinted. "What am I looking at?" I stared, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The balcony was empty. The waves beyond the railing were dark and endless, stretching out to nothing. "I swear," I started, but I stopped, because something was wrong with the glass. A handprint was pressed against the outside of the door. Smudged. Too long. Like whoever left it had too many fingers. Emma sat up fully. "What the hell?" She reached for the balcony door handle. "Don't," I whispered, but she had already unlocked it. The second the door slid open, a rush of cold air flooded the room. The handprint was still there, but whoever, or whatever, left it was gone. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, we went straight to the front desk. We expected them to laugh it off, to tell us it was probably some drunk passenger playing a prank. Instead, the woman at the desk went pale. She exchanged a glance with the manager. Then she asked, What room are you in? Cabin 734, Emma said. Why? The woman hesitated, then forced a tight smile. No reason. But I saw the way her fingers tightened on the desk. Something was wrong. That night, we kept the balcony locked. But at exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke up gasping for air. Not because of a sound, because of a feeling. Something was in the room. I reached for my phone, fumbling for the flashlight. I swiped my screen on, and saw the balcony door was open again. The curtain billowed slightly, the cold ocean breeze making the hair on my arms rise. I turned to Emma, and my stomach dropped. She was standing by the balcony, her back to me, motionless. The door was open behind her, the black sea stretching out beyond the railing. Emma? I whispered. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. I threw off the blankets and got out of bed, my knees shaking. When I placed a hand on her shoulder, her skin was ice cold. She inhaled sharply, like she had been holding her breath for too long. Then she turned to look at me, and for a second, just a second, I swear her eyes weren't her own. They were too dark, her pupils swallowing the color. Then she blinked, and it was just Emma again. She looked at me, confused. "Why are you awake?" she murmured. I stared at her, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You were standing by the balcony," I whispered. She frowned. "No, I wasn't. I was in bed." My stomach twisted, but she wasn't lying. Her side of the bed was untouched. I turned back to the balcony. The door was still open, the ocean beyond it stretching into nothing. That was our last night on the ship. The rest of the trip passed in a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. I started noticing things. The way some crew members avoided looking at us, the strange symbols carved into the wooden railing of our balcony, and the way, every night, I'd wake up at 2:37 a.m., my breath caught in my throat, convinced something was watching me. When we finally docked, Emma and I never spoke about it again. We unfollowed the cruise line's social media, never booked another trip. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still see the ocean, still hear the faint tapping on the glass, still feel the cold air pressing against my skin. And I know, deep down, it's still out there, waiting.
Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing.